It happens every day. Men and women from all walks of life work hard to cultivate a good reputation so their handshake and word are trustworthy. Tonight's guest had all of that. After years in business and politics, he was by every measure respected. He had the currency that propelled him to the top of the state Senate, and he was and still is a top executive at one of America's leading restaurant chains. But what if in a flash that reputation was threatened and all the goodwill and trust you developed was on the verge of evaporating? That's the story of tonight's guest. It's a story I know will give you hope in whatever trial you're facing today. Stay with us. His name is Don Balfour, and from 1992 to 2014, he was the longest-serving Republican member of the Georgia State Senate and one of the state's leading insiders. Many expected him to go to Congress. But in a split second, this husband, father, and respected Christian businessman found himself in a free fall with accusations that he'd misused his position by improperly using and reporting tax dollars. The state's Republican governor suspended him from his leadership roles, and his life became front-page news in Atlanta until his eventual acquittal of all charges. How did he survive the pressure, and what was he thinking in the middle of a life-defining storm? And more importantly, how did it change him? Senator Don Balfour, welcome to State of Independence. I am so excited to talk to you because whatever you've gone through, and specifically this challenge you went through, is what so many people in their lives have gone through. There have been times in people's lives when everything seemed to come apart, and that's when you really see who you are and what you're made of. Tell me about politics. Did you start out when you were a kid? Did you aspire one day to be a politician and a businessman? Is that what you thought about?
No, not really. My dad loved politics, so I blamed some of the politics on him because he just loved it, and so I caught the fire from that. And I probably thought at some point in time I'd maybe run, but the opportunity arose in the early 90s with reapportionment in Georgia, and I jumped in the water.
No, that's great. Now, you're not a native Georgian. You're a New Jersey boy, as I understand it.
Yeah, we didn't tell that secret for a while. But, that is true.
Yeah, but you're Georgia now. You're Georgian now, and people know you and love you, and you've had an extraordinary and successful career. But it's been said that oftentimes the measure of who we are as human beings is not how we do when we're at the top of our game or when everybody's clapping and cheering us, but the measure of who we are oftentimes is seen when the chips are down, when things are toughest. And tell me what happened to you.
In my career, I had probably 18 flawless years. I mean, everyone's complaining about this vote or that vote, but in general, I had flawless years of no problems, and all of a sudden, now I have to start by saying this wasn't the other party coming after me. This was my party coming after me.
Wow.
And the Attorney General of our state started an investigation, which I thought no big deal because there's nothing to be had. And after a year and the state spending over $1 million in legal expenses, they charged me with 18 felony indictments.
Wow.
Which shocked the pants off me.
When did you know you were indicted? And did you have a sense during the course of the investigation that it was going to lead to that?
I thought it would not. I couldn't imagine it would lead to any indictments. But when it finally got to the grand jury, what's the old saying? You can indict a ham sandwich, and once it went to the grand jury, I knew that it was about to happen.
Wow. Did you have an idea of who wanted to get you? I mean, the challenge in politics is that sometimes, like you were saying, people in your own party may want to undo you because somebody may want your spot, or they may want to keep you from running for Congress or governor or U.S. Senate or what have you. What do you think was the case there?
There was two things going on, leaving the names out because that's not material. But there were some people that were probably jealous of my leadership and my positions, and if they could get rid of me, they would get rid of that problem. and there were other people wanting to run for higher office, and they were going to use this. How did Chris Christie become governor of New Jersey? He took down politicians. Well, he took down corrupt politicians, and that helped him win the governorship. So I think other folks were trying to do that as well.
Wow. So how did you find out that you were indicted? I mean, did you get a call from somebody saying, this is coming down the pike and be ready for it, or were you walking to your office and somebody thrust a camera in your face?
No, we saw the grand jury going on, and we knew probably the very day that it was going to happen. It was going to happen. I wanted to. My wife was actually going away that very weekend with some girlfriends from high school, and she was about to cancel her trip because if someone gets indicted on 18th, well, how many indictments we didn't know, but gets indicted, you probably shouldn't leave them alone. And I was like, no, go on your trip. And she's like, no. So the way I talked to her, and they're still going on the trip, I was going to go visit a friend of mine, Eric Turner, in Indiana, and spend a few days with him, a born-again Christian, great guy. And he could hold my hand, or he'd walk with me, or he'd encourage me and so forth. The only other thing I had to do was get my lawyers to find out, if felony number one was an $11 mistake on my expense report. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I would think $11 is a mistake, not a felony.
Trying to steal, right?
But I had my lawyers talk to the Attorney General's office to say, if I go to Indiana, are you going to charge me with fleeing arrest? Or I had no idea. So they called and they said, no, you can go to Indiana as long as you come back by Monday. And I said, I'll be back on Monday. So I went away for the weekend and had some encouragement from another state legislator from Indiana who's a great Christian guy who's a friend of mine, Eric Turner.
Now, were you a Christian person? Would you, everybody, not everybody, lots of people describe themselves as being a Christian because they go to church or they belong, they were baptized or christened in a faith. How would you characterize who you were when this happened to you? Would you have said that you were a Christian person? Were you a believer, a follower of Christ? How would you have?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you want to start off with that generous definition, my dad was a Baptist preacher, so I must be a Christian. Well, we know that's not the case. Right. I accepted the Lord as my Savior at a very early age of 5 or 6 or 7, and I've been a follower of His and involved with my church in Georgia for 40 years.
Wow. So you're a believer when this happens, and
absolutely.
What's going through your mind? Let me tell you. I'm going to tell you this about myself, which is unfortunate but true. Which is, I'm a Christ follower. I'm trying to follow Him every day that He gives me life on the planet, and I am greatly thankful for all that He has done for me. I know that my way has been easier than the way of other people, in many respects, and yet and still. In my private moments, talking to the Almighty, I find myself oftentimes complaining about what I don't have, or about why did this happen to me, or why am I going through this, or did this really have to happen? What purpose does this serve? And that's not really the right attitude of people who believe and follow Him. What was going through your head when you go to Indiana? You got 18 indictments on you. Your dear wife says, "Go, honey, I don't think you should." And you said, "No, I'm okay. I'm going to go spend some time with a buddy." Did you go to Indiana because you knew that Eric Turner was a Christian guy and that he was somebody that they could console or at least advise or encourage you? Or
all those things. All those things. He's he's a Christian friend who, oh, by the way, a few years later went through a similar thing himself. And he's a real solid guy. And once my wife figured out that I was going to be with someone like that, she could go on her trip as well. So, and we spent 3 days together, just going for walks in the morning, going through possibilities. He's not a lawyer any more than I am, but we went through the different possibilities, understanding where we were, and giving me some hope. And and numerous prayers that we had together.
Did you question God? Did you say, hey, God, why are you doing this to me? I mean, I'm a good guy. I'm the son of a preacher. I'm a believer myself. What have I done to deserve this? All I've done is serve the people for 18 years. I mean, why is this happening to me? Did you say that?
I'm not sure I questioned God. I mean, you make me sound like a saint, but we all have our problems. We all are sinners, and we've all made mistakes. So, I really didn't question him, but for days on end, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution front page on top of the fold, Balfour indicted, Balfour under investigation, Balfour this and that.
Right.
And it's more pressure than I've ever had in my life. There's no doubt about that.
Did your friends and people that you know act differently to you? Did they avoid you or shun you?
Yeah, I put people in three categories. One is the folks that set this up were laughing because they were enjoying my problems. There was another group that I would say they didn't know what to say, so therefore they said nothing. Not necessarily right, but I understand that, because what do you say to someone? And then I had not many, a handful of people who reached out to me and said, we're with you, we're praying for you, we know this isn't true. In fact, the night before I was indicted, I called my pastor and I said, Pastor, I got to tell you something. I'm going to be in the paper tomorrow. And he said, what's going to say? It's going to say I'm indicted. But we're going to work through this. We're going to win the case. Now, I said that. I wasn't sure if I was going to or not. And he said to me, Don, you need to understand something. I'm going to be with you the whole way. And then he stopped. I said, well, I appreciate that, buddy. But he goes, but I also want to tell you, I'm with you whether you're innocent or guilty, because you're my friend. You're a believer. And let's say you did something bad. That's wrong, but I'm going to still stick with you. And he was at my trial every single day, and so were a few others.
Wow. Would you say you could count the number of people that were like that on one hand or two?
No more than two hands. No more than two. There were very few. And one thing it taught me, as being a Republican, my thought is always the prosecutor is always right, and maybe the policeman is always right, and maybe they are right most of the time, but they're not always right. And I started spending my time after I went through this when the former governor of Virginia was indicted. I reached out to him. I had met him a couple times, but we hardly knew each other. But my message to him is, I know it's real dark, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And let me tell you my story. Or the speaker from the state house in South Carolina, or the speaker from the state house in Alabama, or the speaker from New York, who, oh, by the way, is probably as liberal as I'm conservative, but he's still a person. I reached out to him and said, Speaker, I'm praying for you. There can be light at the end of the tunnel. And I didn't want to be in that second category. I want to be in the first category of reaching out to folks and giving them the story of, I don't know their stories. I don't know their legal cases, but there can be light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, well, you know that we are charged with, if we say we follow him, and loving him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving our neighbor like we love ourselves. And that's what you were doing when you reached out to those folks who were in similar situations. You knew what they were going through, and you reach out to them, which is a real blessing. I mean, that's what Christian people are supposed to do. That's why we're here. Tell me, how did anybody say to you after, so you end up being acquitted, so yeah. all this stuff happens, the state spends $1 million to put you away and to take you down, and then you're acquitted. And is there a big headline saying Balfour acquitted? Well,
there was, but where there was 20 days where I was front page, top of the fold, there was one day, only one day, the very next day, that said Balfour found not guilty.
Wow.
And I obviously enjoyed that headline, but
it didn't undo all those other days and days and days of headlines saying, Balfour indicted, Balfour being investigated, all those negative things.
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure, and there was other pressures. At the very same time, my only child was training up to go on his first tour of duty to Afghanistan. And so you had that pressure and this pressure, and there were many sleepless nights.
Are there people who knew you before you were indicted and who know you still and now that say that the experience changed you? And if so, how did it change you?
Well, I mentioned the one way it definitely changed me. I started reaching out to others who had been charged. Maybe my first thought was, wow, they must have done something wrong because you don't go out and charge people. Well, I knew I wasn't guilty. And so I've reached out to numerous folks that are going through the similar, just to encourage them that it looks dark. It looks very dark, but there can be light at the end of the tunnel. So that's one way it definitely changed me.
Yeah. Your wife did she see a change in you or?
I would hope so. We talk about the pressure and questioning God. She's a cardiac intensive care nurse at a children's hospital. Normally she gets home at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. One day she gets home at 7 at night. I said to her, tough day? She said, yeah, that baby tried to die on me, but I wouldn't let him.
Wow.
Now, it changes our perspective of the hard day I had at work.
Yeah.
Or the hard day I had at the Capitol.
Yeah.
She's dealing with life and death and there are a lot of people that are in those situations that need encouragement.
Yeah. Well, this really speaks, I think, to lots of people because not everybody has the situation where they're indicted or where their name is plastered on the front page of the newspaper. But there are people who have had bad things said about them, whose reputations have been damaged, and oftentimes it's so hard to repair. There was a poem which I can't remember precisely that my late mother-in-law used to share about China or whatever, and she said, and then it ends up with the China, the plate of China is cracked, but it's repaired somehow or another. But the end line becomes something like, "But the crack is always there,"
Right.
And it's is the scar still there for you? Do people still look at you with a jaundiced eye? Do they, when you meet somebody who knows the name, are there people that know the name Don Balfour and all they know is that you were indicted, but they don't know, like you said, there was only one day and one page that said found not guilty. All the others said guilty. Are there people that look at you that way?
Yeah, there's no doubt. When I ran for re-election, those who tried to take me down got 2 people to run against me. And in the end, I lost that election. My joke is I lost because of illness. People got sick and tired of me. But I lost because of, X amount of people believe, well, if you were indicted, there must have been something there. You must have hired expensive lawyers, which believe me, I did. And they found some loophole. Well, they didn't find a loophole. They have to prove that you intentionally did the act. Well, why would a millionaire steal $11?
Right.
I mean, just, in fact, there was a point in time during the case where the judge almost acted as my defense. It was very interesting. He started asking me questions, and it was, they went through, how many Waffle Houses do you own? And I said, well, I don't own any, but I own stock in the company. Well, how many states are they in? I told him. He says, well, how can you do that and be a state senator? I said, well, like you, Judge, if we're done at noontime tomorrow, I have my pilots waiting for me at 12:30. I get on the plane and I can be in Denver at 12:30. I can be in Dallas at 12:30. He goes, what kind of planes you have? And I'm, well, I got a Gulfstream this and a Gulfstream that and a Hawk and the different jets we have. And they were like, man, you got a fleet. And I was thinking to myself, what does that have to do with my case? Well, when I sat back down, my lawyer said, that judge was helping you out because who has $500 million in assets like that steals $11?
Right, exactly. This is a great conversation. Hold on for me, Don. When we return, I'll want to ask Don not only how he views the trial and the test of his faith, but is he the same person or is he forever changed? And about his business life as well. He's been an extraordinarily successful businessman. We'll cover all that when we come right back.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
I'm talking with former Georgia State Senator Don Balfour. Today he is vice president of a famous food chain that has nearly 2,000 individual stores, Waffle House. And just saying that makes me hungry, by the way. Senator, tell us were you doing Waffle House work? Were you owning those companies before you ever ran for office?
I was. I started with Waffle House numerous years before I ran for the legislature, and the owner of Waffle House was very encouraging to me as far when I decided to run. He said, "Go for it," and they were very helpful during that whole situation.
Great. Do you get discounts now if you eat at one of your restaurants?
I pay for my meal, but then when I get back to the office, I put it on my expense report. So practically, I don't pay for it, but the restaurant itself is whole.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that you raised that when you were talking about your case, because it helps even viewers now who may wonder, like, I wonder if he really did it. You know, when you consider the absurdity of somebody who has been extraordinarily successful and blessed and happens to be wealthy because of the business that he's doing, you know, when you realize the absurdity of you trying to steal $11 to enrich yourself when you don't need $11, that really helps, I think, everybody watching to say, wow, that's pretty hard. I mean, how does that even happen to somebody? And yet it happened to you. I mean, so unfair that somebody would bring an indictment against you and say that you tried to steal $11 to bring you down when you've been so successful and you don't need $11 to succeed. You don't need $11 more to succeed. Do you have bitterness in your heart? I mean, it would be hard for most human beings, having gone through that, to not harbor some anger and or bitterness in their heart toward the people that did this.
It took me a while to consider forgiveness for those who did this to me. But eventually you got to get around to that, because it's you have to, or else it eats you up inside.
So you've forgiven them? You feel like you've forgiven the people that did this?
I believe so. I mean, whatever happens to them. I mean, one of the people is under investigation right now, and some friends will call me up and say, he's getting his. I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm for that. It which shocks them that I would.
Yeah, not be like, exactly. That's the right attitude. I think that's the Christian attitude. You're not cheering that this person who tried to undo you is now having a hard time himself. And that's who we are as we follow Christ. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Don, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for your life of service and for your willing to follow the Master. And for the example you set for others. We are grateful to God for you, and may God bless you richly. After the break, we'll talk to our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
So now let's talk to our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
Well, I loved that conversation. I thought it was very helpful, not just to people who are in politics who have experienced scandal. You and I have many friends who have been in positions of power, who have lost the perception of power. Maybe did nothing wrong, and in this case did nothing wrong, was acquitted. But still the perception, the mantle, the special magic that people see when somebody enters the room is gone. How you deal with that, I think, is important. I also don't think that, this is maybe just a personal observation, I don't think that God allows people to become monuments to themselves. That at some point, he has to find ways to make us what he wants us to be like. I don't know, all the circumstances, but you when you meet a Don Balfour today, you're just compelled by his kindness and his humor and things, and you wouldn't know that he had been through a hot trial in front page news.
What do you think his story says to younger people who might aspire to do what he has done politically and otherwise?
I think it says that, for some people might look at the story and say, that's why I'd never get involved in politics, because in a minute they can take you out. I think that's the wrong attitude. I think the lesson is, when you go into politics, if God calls you, or entertainment, or other positions that expose you to a lot of people or media, you don't need to guard your reputation. God will give you the reputation that he needs to use you for what he is calling you to do. So you don't have to sit there and think, how do I manage my reputation and cultivate my reputation? If a good headline gets what he wants out of us, great. If a bad headline makes him look good, great. I think that's what leads us to this notion of, what does it mean to be content?
There's great gain in contentment,
Yeah.
the scriptures say, and that's true. Most of us as Christian people would feel like, once I accept Christ and I follow him, it'd be great if I just had sunshine going
Right.
forward, if everything just worked together for the good that those
Right.
who love the Lord. But there's rain that falls, and
Yeah.
none of us is happy for it. None of us are happy for it, as best I can tell. I know if there were ways that I could avoid some of the difficulties in my life, I would. But God uses even those difficult points to shape us. Don is a different person today because of what happened to him.
Absolutely. And I think we are all, if you take away the suffering, if you take away the hard things in life, what you're left with are people that are self-made men and women. I don't think those are the best people. You want people who are dependent on God and others to be who God created us to be.
Yeah. Well said, brother. Well said. Well, I hope you found Don's story as encouraging as I did. God promises seasons of trial and testing, but he also promises we never go alone. When he calls us to go through the fires, he's right there with us. If you have a free minute, drop me a personal note in the comment box at joewatkins.org. I read and respond to every one of you. I'd love to know what you thought about today's conversation with Don Balfour. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching. God willing, I'll see you next week. It's amazing how God's able to use our trials and our difficulties even still for his purpose and glory. When Don heard that one of the guys that was trying to get him was going through the same persecution.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.